If I had known the day I moved into my dream home that my greatest battle would be keeping from the clutches of a neighbor who thought the world owed him everything, maybe I would have second-guessed the whole thing. One entitled teenager, one furious lawyer, and one lawsuit later, I realized it wasn't just a house on the line. It was my dignity, my future, and the one thing I had fought my entire life to earn, freedom. I still remember the first time I stepped onto the driveway. It was early morning, the fog clinging to the tall trees that framed the lot like ancient sentinels. Birds chirped high above, and the early dew glistened over the perfectly trimmed grass. My heart raced, not with nerves, but with triumph. This wasn't just a house. It was proof that every late-night shift, every sleepless exam cramming session, and every lonely year spent grinding when others partied had meant something. 2 stories, a wide porch, old-growth trees scattered across the sprawling yard, and a backyard view that melted into a thick forest. It wasn't just real estate. It was peace. Home. The day I signed the papers, my parents wept on a shaky video call. "We always knew you'd make it," my mom said, dabbing at her eyes. But deep down, even they couldn't imagine the chaos that would follow. Neither could I. It wasn't long before I met the young prince himself. One lazy Sunday afternoon, I was trimming the hedges when I heard someone call out, "Yo, neighbor dude." I turned, blinking in the sunlight. Marching up the driveway was a tall, wiry young man with slick back hair, an attitude that oozed confidence. Stephen Jr. "I'm Stephen," he said, flashing a grin. "Junior. You know, Stephen's kid." "Hey," I replied cautiously, lowering the shears. He leaned casually against my fence, acting like we were old friends. "I just graduated," he said, thumping his chest like a hero. "Big moves ahead. Got an internship locked down thanks to my old man. Gonna be the next big thing. Real estate, investments, business ownership. You know how it is." I nodded politely, not knowing what to say. Internship or not, he seemed off. Like a teenager who had been handed confidence without competence. And for reasons I couldn't explain, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder at my house gave me a sour feeling in my gut. I chalked it up to arrogance. I didn't realize he was surveying my home like a predator eyeing its next meal. The real shock came 2 weeks later. It was a humid Friday evening. I had just gotten home from a long week of work, kicked off my shoes, and cracked open a cold beer when knock, knock, knock. Groaning, I shuffled to the door, expecting a package or maybe a neighborhood announcement. Instead, there stood Stephen Jr., arms folded, a cocky smile plastered across his face. "Hey, man, mind if I come in?" I hesitated. Actually, I'm pretty tired." He laughed, pushing past me slightly into the doorway, without waiting for permission. "I'll make it quick," he said. "Listen, I've been thinking. Your house? It's perfect for me. Location, size, yard. It's everything I need for my new life. Dad and I talked about it. It's time you sold it to me." I stared at him, speechless. "And don't worry," he added, waving a hand like he was doing me a favor. "We'll pay extra. 50 grand more than you bought it for. Easy cash for you. Plus, you'd be doing a great thing for someone just starting out." It wasn't an offer. It was an expectation. As if my blood, sweat, and tears meant nothing, because someone with a silver spoon decided they wanted what was mine. For the first time since moving in, I felt an invisible line being drawn. A line that Stephen Jr. had no idea he was about to trip over, with consequences he couldn't even imagine. At first, my neighbors seemed ideal. Quiet, distant, and polite, the trifecta of suburban peace. Stephen, the man living next door, introduced himself on my second evening. A sharply dressed figure with graying temples, a glint of sharp intelligence behind his rectangular glasses, and a handshake that seemed a little too firm. "I'm Stephen," he said simply, "attorney at law." "Nice to meet you," I replied, brushing a speck of dust off my moving box. He smiled thinly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "If you need anything," he said, nodding toward his well-manicured yard, "just knock." It was polite enough, but something about it. It was more warning than welcome. I brushed it off. I had no reason to get involved with him anyway. New town, new chapter, minimal drama. Or so I thought. My first real sign that things wouldn't stay so quiet came 3 weeks later. Saturday afternoon turned into Saturday night, and my peaceful neighborhood transformed into what I could only describe as a small music festival. Loud music thumped across the streets. Cars lined the road. Strangers carrying red cups filled the sidewalk. I peeked out the window. Stephen's house was swarming with teenagers and 20-somethings. Someone had even strung disco lights across the hedges. Curious, I wandered to my porch. Graduation party. An older neighbor walking her dog muttered grimly, "For Stephen's boy. Spoiled rotten, that one." I raised an eyebrow. Big celebration. The woman laughed humorlessly. Big ego to match. Throughout the night, the music shook my walls. Around 2 a.m., I finally gave up and wore earplugs. Little did I know, this was just a glimpse into the world of Stephen Jr., and the entitled storm that was about to crash into my life. There's a moment when you realize you're not dealing with entitled kids or angry neighbors. You're facing something far uglier. When the threats started and the lawyer next door promised to forcibly remove me from my own home, I understood. This wasn't just a neighborly disagreement anymore. It was war. I closed the door just enough to create space between us, forcing a small, tight smile. "I appreciate the offer," I said, my voice careful, even, "but this house is not for sale." Stephen Jr.'s smile wavered, confusion flickering behind his eyes, like it simply hadn't occurred to him that anyone would refuse. "Dude, come on," he said, voice lowering like he was sharing a secret. 50 grand. That's free money for you. You could move anywhere. Get a condo closer to the city. Start fresh." I shook my head, feeling my patience thin. I didn't buy this house to flip it. I bought it to live in it, build my future here. His face twisted, confusion hardening into something uglier. Without another word, he turned sharply on his heel and stormed down the porch steps. I watched him go, a slow dread curling in my gut. That should have been the end of it. But something told me he wasn't done yet. Later that night, as the sun dipped below the treetops, I sat on my porch, sipping a cold drink, replaying the strange encounter over and over. Was I overthinking it? Maybe it was just a dumb kid, hyped up on graduation excitement and his dad's promises. But then the headlights came. Stephen's luxury SUV rolled up in front of my driveway, headlights slicing through the growing darkness. I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. Out stepped Stephen Jr., this time flanked by 2 of his friends. They didn't walk to my door. They didn't call out. They just stood there, laughing, pointing at my house like it was already theirs. My fists clenched. This wasn't about a business transaction. This was about entitlement, a belief that they could simply take what they wanted. And somehow, deep inside, I knew they had help, powerful help. The next morning, an envelope appeared tucked under my welcome mat. No knock, no doorbell, just an envelope. Inside was a hastily typed letter. Another offer, this time for $75,000 over my purchase price. Cash. I stared at it, half stunned, half furious. They had escalated overnight. Not only that, they genuinely believed that money would solve everything, that I could be bought off just like another transaction on their daddy's ledger. For a split second, I imagined what that money could do. Pay off my student loans, beef up my retirement, start a business. But then I pictured Stephen Jr., smug, throwing some gaudy housewarming party in my home. I pictured myself bitter in some cramped apartment, haunted by the smell of the woods I left behind. No amount of money could replace the peace I had carved out for myself here. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash. That, I thought, was the end of it, but it wasn't even the beginning. Later that day, as the sun reached its blazing peak, another knock thundered against my door. I opened it and froze. It wasn't Stephen Jr. this time. It was Stephen himself. No polite smile, no handshake, just a cold, furious glare. "We need to talk," he growled, stepping forward like he owned the place. "I think we already did," I said, holding firm. He huffed, running a hand through his slick hair. You had the chance to make an easy deal, he said. Now you're making this complicated. I crossed my arms. I'm not interested in selling. He stepped closer, towering over me now, close enough to smell the expensive cologne masking his sweat. You don't understand, he hissed. My son needs this house. Needs it. It's important for his future. We're offering you more than it's worth out of kindness. I clenched my jaw. It's not about the money. It's not happening. Stephen's eyes narrowed, like a predator sizing up weaker prey. And then he said it. If you don't sell, the offer's off the table. We'll handle it legally. We'll have you forcibly removed if we have to. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Did he really just say that? Forcibly removed? Over a house I legally owned? I stared at him, stunned. You're a lawyer, I said slowly. You know that's not how it works. He smiled coldly. I'm a lawyer who wins. I don't care about how it works. I care about results. Then he turned and stalked off, leaving me standing there on my porch, blood roaring in my ears. A slow, terrible realization bloomed inside me. This wasn't some neighborhood disagreement anymore. This was a calculated attack. They were coming after me, coming for everything I had built, and they were willing to use everything, money, intimidation, and law, to take it. I watched Stephen disappear into his mansion next door, slamming the door behind him. My hands were shaking as I closed my own door, locked it, and leaned back against it, breathing heavily. The war for my home had officially begun, and I wasn't even close to being ready. Not yet, but I would be. I had to be. When a man who has everything still demands more, and threatens to crush you to get it, you're left with two choices, surrender or fight. And standing on my porch that night, heart racing, I realized something terrifying. Stephen wasn't just willing to ruin me. He was expecting me to lose. The following morning, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, replaying Stephen's words over and over. Forcibly removed. Results. Threats, cloaked in legalese, but threats nonetheless. I splashed cold water on my face, steadied my breathing, and told myself something I hadn't dared say out loud yet. I'm not going anywhere. If they thought intimidation would work, they were wrong. If they thought they could buy me out or scare me away, they'd picked the wrong guy. I hadn't clawed my way up from nothing to hand my future over to a spoiled brat and his arrogant father. I was going to stand firm, no matter what came next, even if it destroyed me. It didn't take long for Stephen to make good on his threat. 3 days later, a courier knocked on my door. Manila envelope. Thick. Heavy. I knew even before I opened it. The lawsuit. Inside, pages and pages of accusations. Breach of verbal agreement. Emotional distress caused to Stephen Jr. Defamation of character. Unlawful withholding of property. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair, scanning the nonsense written in that legalese, feeling my stomach churn. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a weapon designed to overwhelm, to frighten, to crush. A ticking time bomb wrapped in polite legal stationery. And for a moment, just a moment, it almost worked. Doubt clawed at the edges of my mind. Was this how I lost everything? The next few days were a blur. I barely slept, barely ate. Everywhere I turned, I imagined disaster. Eviction notices, court dates, bankruptcy. The documents sprawled across my kitchen table felt endless. Every word seemed designed to make me doubt myself, to confuse me, to bury me under a mountain of fear. Stephen had attacked perfectly. He didn't just want my house. He wanted to make me believe I didn't deserve to fight for it. There were moments, weak moments, where I almost gave in. Maybe it's easy to sell, I whispered into the dark one night. Maybe it's safer to just walk away. But deep inside, a spark refused to die. A stubborn little flame fueled by every sacrifice, every hardship, every damn thing I had done to earn this life. And I realized, if Stephen wanted war, he'd get war. But first, I needed help. I dug through my contacts until I found a name my father had once mentioned, James. A semi-retired legal advisor, rough around the edges but sharp as a scalpel. I called him late on a Wednesday night, voice shaking slightly. James, I said, I think I'm in trouble. The next morning, we met at a dingy diner off the highway. James showed up in a worn leather jacket, carrying nothing but a battered briefcase and a hard stare. He listened as I spilled everything. The threats, the offers, the lawsuit. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, chewing thoughtfully on his coffee stirrer. "You're scared," he said simply. I nodded. "Good," he said. "Means you're not stupid." He cracked a grin. "Now, let's make sure they regret ever thinking you were." Over coffee and greasy eggs, James laid it all out. The lawsuit was paper thin. Most of their claims had no legal standing. No verbal agreement meant no contract. Property ownership was absolute, unless I had signed something I hadn't. They had no claim. "But listen," he said, leaning in, voice lowering. "Stephen's not playing by the rules. He's banking on fear, confusion, pressure. You fight him smart and you'll bury him." For the first time in days, I felt hope flicker. Not much, but enough. James wasn't interested in playing defense. "We're going on offense," he said, tapping the table with his pen. "Over the next few days, we built a case not just to defend my home, but to expose Stephen's abuse of power. We documented every text message Stephen Jr. sent, every recorded threat Stephen made at my doorstep. Thank God for the doorbell cam. The aggressive tactics, the unsolicited offers, the intimidation." James also dug deeper into Stephen's professional history, and what he found made my blood run cold. Stephen had a reputation. Quiet settlements. Whispers of bullying opponents into submission. Nothing illegal enough to end his career, but enough to show a pattern. "He's a bully," James said grimly, "and bullies break when you push back hard enough." I gathered everything, screenshots, videos, written notes, and handed them over as James tucked the last file into his briefcase. He looked up at me and smiled. "You wanted a home," he said. "Good, because now we're going to make damn sure they never take it from you." They say courtrooms are places of truth, but stepping into that arena, I realized something harsher. Courtrooms are battlegrounds where power, manipulation, and lies clash head-on. And standing across from Stephen and his smug son, I knew this wasn't just a fight for my house anymore. It was a fight for everything I believed in. James moved fast. Within a week, he filed a counter lawsuit, not just offending me, but going after Stephen's aggressive tactics, wrongful harassment, abuse of legal power, malicious prosecution. When the official papers were served to Stephen's house, I watched from my porch. Stephen stood on his driveway, envelope in hand, face red as fury bloomed across his features. His son hovered behind him, shifting nervously. For the first time, they looked unsettled. Good. Let them know. I wasn't running. I was fighting. James smirked when I called him with the update. "Phase 1, he said. "Now let's see if he's as brave when the spotlight's on him." The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. James drilled me like a boot camp instructor. How to answer questions calmly. How to stick only to facts. How not to react if Stephen or his lawyer tried to bait me. We mapped out every possible angle Stephen might attack from, reviewed every threat he made, every document he forged, every false claim he filed. James even connected me with 2 of Stephen's former opponents, people he had bullied in previous lawsuits, and collected sworn statements about his intimidation tactics. "It's not just about facts," James said. "It's about painting the full picture." Meanwhile, every night, I walked through my house, running my fingers across the walls, standing on the porch at sunset, reminding myself what I was fighting for. This wasn't just property. This was my life. And no amount of legal trickery was going to take it from me. The morning of the court date dawned gray and heavy. I put on my best suit, straightened my tie, and tried to silence the hammering of my heart. James met me outside the courthouse, handing me a coffee. "Smile," he said. "This is the first day of the rest of your life." Inside the courtroom, everything smelled of old paper and polished wood. Stephen and Stephen Jr. sat at the opposite table, both stone-faced, both radiating fury. Their lawyer, a sleek, sharp-dressed man, whispered furiously to them. Stephen Jr. kept sneaking glances at me, his expression unreadable. The judge entered. Everyone rose. And just like that, the battle began. opening arguments. Stephen's lawyer painted me as a liar, a backstabber, an opportunist who agreed to sell and then betrayed a family's trust. It was nauseating. But when it was our turn, James stood with the calm of a seasoned warrior. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady, "this is not a case about betrayal. This is about intimidation, about power abused, and about one man's right to live in peace without being bullied out of his home." The air crackled with tension. The judge nodded slowly. The real fight was on. When it was my turn to testify, my palms were slick with sweat, but my voice didn't shake. I laid out everything. How Stephen Jr. had demanded I sell my home. How they escalated with threats when I refused. How Stephen promised to forcibly remove me. How their offers weren't negotiations. They were ultimatums. James played clips from my doorbell camera. Stephen's voice, clear as a gunshot, making threats on my own porch. There was a murmur through the courtroom. I locked eyes with the judge, steady and sure. "I bought that house after years of sacrifice," I said. "I earned it, and I wasn't going to let them steal it because they thought they could." Stephen's lawyer scrambled to object, but the judge waved him off. Every piece of evidence hit like a hammer. Every lie they told crumbled under the truth. And I saw it. Stephen Jr.'s shoulders slumping. Stephen's jaw tightening in panic. They weren't just losing. They were exposed. When the final arguments ended, the judge called for a brief recess. We waited in agony, pacing the halls like prisoners awaiting verdict. Then the bailiff called us back in. The judge's face was unreadable as he shuffled the papers in front of him, but when he spoke, his voice was clear. "Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that the plaintiff's case is without merit. Ownership of the property remains solely with the defendant. Furthermore, this court finds that the plaintiffs engaged in a campaign of harassment and intimidation, warranting damages to be awarded to the defendant." I barely heard the rest over the roaring in my ears. I had won. Stephen's face turned an impossible shade of red. Stephen Jr. stared at the floor, broken. The gavel slammed down like a thunderclap. Court adjourned. I turned to James, who clapped me on the back with a satisfied grin. "Told you," he said. "First day of the rest of your life." And for the first time in months, as I stepped out into the bright sunlight outside the courthouse, I believed him. Victory feels sweet, until you realize the people you just defeated aren't finished fighting. As I stepped out of that courthouse with the judgment in my favor, I thought the nightmare was over. I didn't know it yet, but Stephen and his spoiled son still had a few desperate, vicious tricks left up their sleeves. The days after the court victory passed in a surreal haze. News of the judgment traveled fast through the neighborhood. Neighbors I barely knew suddenly nodded respectfully as I passed. A few even clapped me on the back, whispering words of congratulations. For once, Stephen's house sat dark and silent. No flashy cars, no loud parties, just a hollow, brooding stillness. James handled all the paperwork, and within a week, the damages awarded by the court were wired to my account. It wasn't just money. It was validation. Proof that everything Stephen had thrown at me, the intimidation, the lies, the lawsuits, had failed. He had underestimated me. They both had. And now, they were the ones paying the price. But the consequences didn't stop with the financial loss. The judge's ruling triggered a mandatory ethics review of Stephen's behavior. It didn't take long. Within 2 weeks, Stephen was officially suspended from practicing law pending a full investigation by the Bar Association. When the news broke, it was like watching a dam collapse. Former clients started coming forward. Old rivals resurfaced. A wave of complaints flooded the system. Turns out, I hadn't been his only victim, just the one who finally stood his ground. One evening, I saw Stephen to the blinds, packing boxes into his car with tight, jerky movements. No more designer suits. No more smugness. Just a defeated, hollow man trying to outrun the ruins of his reputation. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I just watched. Sometimes, karma doesn't need an audience. Even though Stephen was already under review, James insisted we submit a formal complaint ourselves. "Finish what you started," he said. So we did. We sent a detailed report, complete with video evidence, text threats, copies of false claims, to the Bar Association's Ethics Committee. Weeks later, they contacted me directly. "We take these matters very seriously," the investigator assured me. "Rest assured, you did the right thing." I didn't need the validation, but hearing it said aloud felt good, really good. I had fought back, not just for myself, but for everyone Stephen had ever tried to steamroll with his power. Justice wasn't a dream anymore. It was happening, and it had my fingerprints all over it. Just when I thought it was finally over, the phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I wish I hadn't. Stephen Jr. S voice oozed through the receiver like poison. "You don't understand what you've done," he hissed, words slurring slightly. "You destroyed our family. You should have been grateful. You should have thanked us for even offering you a way out." I stared at the wall, stunned. This kid still thought he was the victim, still believed the world owed him something for simply existing. He ranted for another few minutes, about how he couldn't find a house he liked, how his father's suspension ruined their finances, how I had ruined everything. Finally, when he paused to breathe, I spoke quietly. "Don't call this number again." Then I hung up, blocked the number, deleted the call. No anger, no satisfaction, just peace. And that was the moment I knew they couldn't touch me anymore. After that final call, I made a decision. I cut off every remaining avenue they could use to reach me. New locks on my doors, updated phone settings. I even installed a security system with cameras covering every inch of my property. Not out of fear, out of certainty. I had earned my peace, and I wasn't about to let anyone steal it from me again. For the first time in months, I sat on my porch in the evening and listened, really listened, to the quiet hum of life around me. The wind whispering through the trees, birds calling from their nests, the comforting creak of the old wooden boards under my chair. Home, not just a place, a victory, a promise to myself that no matter how dark the world could get, I would never back down again. Some battles don't end when the courtroom doors close. Real victory is waking up without fear, without regret, knowing you stood your ground when it mattered most. And as Stephen's final downfall unfolded and my life moved forward, I realized something powerful. I hadn't just kept my home. I had rebuilt myself stronger than ever before. The Bar Association didn't move quickly, but they moved thoroughly. Over the next few months, I received updates, interviews with Stephen's old clients, deeper investigations into past complaints he thought were buried. The dominoes kept falling. One afternoon, while checking my mail, I spotted a thick, official envelope. Inside was a formal notification. Stephen was permanently disbarred, banned from practicing law ever again. I read the letter twice, barely breathing, not suspended, not reprimanded, gone. A lifetime of abuse and manipulation caught up with him, because he thought no one would ever push back. He was wrong, and I had been the final nail in the coffin. After the disbarment, the neighborhood finally exhaled. Stephen's house was listed quietly, almost shamefully. No flashy signs, no open houses. Within a month, it sold to a young family. 2 kids, a golden retriever, the whole dream. When the moving trucks rolled away, leaving the place vacant for the last time, I stood at my window and watched, not out of gloating, not out of spite, but out of gratitude. The monster next door was finally gone. No more threats, no more games, just me, my house, and the life I had fought so hard to protect. That night, I lit a small fire up in the backyard, sat back with a cold drink, and stared up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, the world felt quiet again, safe, mine. The financial payout from the damages was finalized a few weeks later. James handled everything, ensuring every dollar Stephen owed me was collected cleanly and legally. When the deposit hit my account, I sat back and stared at the number. It wasn't enough to erase what I'd been through. No amount of money could do that, but it was enough to breathe easier, enough to upgrade my security system, enough to start a rainy day fund, and enough to take a long overdue vacation, my first real one in years. A small victory, maybe, But after months of war, even small victories tasted sweet. One evening, a few months later, I sat on the same porch where Stephen Jr. had once arrogantly demanded my home. The sunset painted the sky in burning golds and purples. I thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the lawsuits, the nights spent wondering if I would lose everything. And I realized something simple but powerful. Justice isn't automatic. It's fought for. It's claimed. And sometimes it's messy, painful, and exhausting. But it's worth it, not just for the win, but for the knowledge that when the world pushed me to the edge, I didn't fall. I stood, and I won. If there's one thing this entire ordeal taught me, it's this. Never let bullies, no matter how rich, powerful, or entitled, take from you what you've rightfully earned. Because when you stand your ground, when you refuse to be steamrolled, you don't just keep what's yours. You send a message that echoes far beyond your front door. A message that says, I am not afraid. I will not be bought. And I will never, ever back down. That house is still mine. That peace is still mine. And the life I built, brick by brick, blood and sweat and dreams. It's mine, forever.